I never thought I'd have to arrest someone from my own neighborhood. But when that woman put scissors to my son's head, she sealed her fate. She had no idea who she was messing with. Let me take you back to last summer. My family and I had just moved into what we thought was our dream home. A beautiful two-story house with a spacious backyard in a quiet neighborhood. Perfect for my 9-year-old son, Jamie, who has autism. He needs routine and calm environments, and this place seemed ideal. What we didn't realize was that our homeowners association was run by a group of power-hungry busybodies, particularly one woman named Debra. From day one, she had issues with everything we did. The color of our mailbox, the height of our grass, the wind chimes on our porch, nothing was ever good enough. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Michael, and I've been the chief of police in our city for 8 years. My wife, Sarah, is a special education teacher, and together we've been navigating life with our son, Jamie, who was diagnosed with autism when he was 3. One thing about Jamie, he's particular about certain things, especially his hair. He can't stand haircuts. The sensation of scissors near his ears, the sound of the clippers, the feel of hair falling on his neck. It's all overwhelming for him, so he let his hair grow long. It was past his shoulders, but it was clean and well kept. Jamie loved his hair. It was part of his identity, his comfort zone. Little did I know that this would become the center of the biggest confrontation I've ever had in my professional or personal life. It started with a letter, official HOA letterhead, signed by Debra Stevens, HOA president. The letter informed us that our son's hair length violated the neighborhood's appearance standards and needed to be cut within 7 days. I was furious. I immediately called the number listed at the bottom of the letter. HOA office, Debra speaking. She answered with that sickly sweet voice that made my skin crawl. This is Michael from 1847 Oakwood Drive. I just received your letter about my son's hair. Yes, Mr. Reynolds. The guidelines clearly state that male residents must maintain hair length above the collar. It's in Section 12.4 of the covenant you signed. My son has autism. Haircuts are traumatic for him. We keep his hair clean and tied back. This is a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. There was a pause, then a dismissive laugh. The ADA doesn't apply to appearance standards, Mr. Reynolds. Rules are rules. 7 days or the fines start at $100 per day. I explained calmly that I would be fighting this, that it was discriminatory, and that she should consult the HOA's lawyer before pushing this further. I even offered to provide documentation from Jamie's doctor. She hung up on me. That evening, I consulted with a friend who specializes in disability law. He confirmed what I already knew. The HOA was on shaky legal ground. We drafted a formal response citing the relevant laws and requesting a reasonable accommodation for Jamie's disability. Debra's response came 3 days later, slipped under our door. Request denied. Compliance expected by original deadline. Sarah and I discussed our options. We could pay the fines while fighting this legally, which might take months. We could comply and put Jamie through the trauma of a haircut. Or we could stand our ground and deal with the consequences. We're not cutting his hair, Sarah said firmly. This is discrimination, plain and simple. I agreed. I'll file a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They oversee Fair Housing Act violations. The deadline came and went. The fines started accumulating, but we ignored the invoices. I filed the complaint with HUD and notified the HOA board that we were doing so. Most of the board members seemed uncomfortable with the situation when I spoke with them individually, but none were willing to stand up to Debra. Then came Saturday. Sarah had taken Jamie to the park while I caught up on some work at home. My phone rang. It was Sarah, and she was crying. Michael, you need to come to the park right now. It's Debra. She cut Jamie's hair. He's hysterical. I can't calm him down. I don't remember the drive to the park. One minute I was at my desk, the next I was sprinting across the playground toward the sound of my son's screams. Jamie was curled up on a bench, his body shaking with sobs. Sarah was trying to comfort him, but he was in full meltdown mode. And there stood Debra, scissors in hand, with a smug smile on her face. Around her feet lay clumps of my son's hair, some still held together by the elastic band that had kept it in a ponytail. "What have you done?" I asked, my voice barely controlled as I knelt beside my son. "Enforced the rules," Debra replied, like she was commenting on the weather. "Since you refused to comply, I took matters into my own hands. Perhaps next time you'll respect our community standards." Jamie wouldn't let me touch him. His whole body was rigid, his hands pressed tightly over his ears as he rocked back and forth, eyes squeezed shut. This was worse than any meltdown I'd ever seen him have. I looked up at Debra, who was still standing there with those scissors, watching my son's distress with absolutely no empathy. Several neighbors had gathered, most looking horrified at what was unfolding. "Sarah, keep trying to calm him down," I said quietly, then stood to face Debra. "You do realize what you've just done, right?" I asked, my voice dangerously steady. Debra rolled her eyes. "Enforced our community's standards. Something you should have done weeks ago." I took a deep breath. "Debra Stevens, you are under arrest for assault and battery of a minor." Her smug smile faltered. "What? You can't be serious." I've never been more serious in my life. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my badge. "Chief of Police, remember? You just committed assault against a disabled child in front of multiple witnesses." The color drained from her face. "This is ridiculous. I was enforcing the rules." "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I continued reading her rights as I took out my phone to call for a patrol car. One of the neighbors stepped forward. "I got it all on video," she said, holding up her phone. "She snuck up behind the boy while he was on the swing and just started cutting. His mom tried to stop her, but she pushed her away." "Add assault of a second victim," I noted calmly. "And thank you. We'll need that video as evidence." Debra started backing away. "This is absurd. You can't arrest me for this. I'm the HOA president." "HOA president isn't above the law, Debra, and neither are you." I gestured for her to stay put. "A patrol car is 3 minutes out. Don't make this worse for yourself." "You'll regret this," she hissed. "The board will back me up." Another neighbor stepped forward. Bob, who I knew was on the HOA board. "Actually, Debra, we won't. We've been trying to rein you in for months. This crosses every line." While we waited for the patrol car, I turned my attention back to Jamie. Sarah had managed to get him to uncurl slightly, but he was still in distress, rubbing his now uneven hair and whimpering. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, keeping my distance since I knew he wouldn't want to be touched. "I'm so sorry this happened. We're going to make it right." When the patrol car arrived, I briefly explained the situation to Officers Rodriguez and Mitchell. They took Debra into custody while I stayed with my family. Jamie had finally exhausted himself and was leaning against Sarah, hiccuping with residual sobs. "We should take him home," Sarah said, "and then to the doctor. He might need something to help him calm down. I've never seen him this bad." As we walked to our car, neighbors approached us one by one, expressing their shock and offering support. Many admitted they'd been afraid to stand up to Debra and her rigid enforcement of increasingly restrictive HOA rules. "This isn't just about my son's hair," I told them. "It's about a pattern of harassment and discrimination that's been going on for too long." By the time we got home, word had spread throughout the neighborhood. My phone was ringing constantly. Board members, neighbors, even the local news. I ignored them all, focusing instead on helping Jamie. Our family doctor made a house call, prescribed a mild sedative for Jamie, and documented the trauma response and the uneven haircut for our records. "This will definitely help your case," he said grimly as he packed up his bag. What she did was inexcusable. Later that evening, after Jamie had finally fallen asleep, Sarah and I sat in the kitchen trying to process everything. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "Legally, she'll be charged. Given the witnesses and video evidence, she'll likely take a plea deal. Personally, I want her nowhere near our son ever again." Sarah nodded. "And the HOA? I've been getting texts from board members. They're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. From what I can gather, they're as horrified as everyone else." The next day brought a flurry of activity. The district attorney called to inform me they were charging Debra with assault of a minor with enhanced penalties due to Jamie's disability status. Our lawyer called to say he was filing for an emergency restraining order to keep Debra away from our family. And at 2 p.m., we attended the emergency HOA board meeting. The community room at the neighborhood clubhouse was packed. Every chair was filled, with people standing along the walls. The remaining board members sat at a table at the front, looking uncomfortable. Bob, the vice president, called the meeting to order. "Due to recent events, we're here to discuss the leadership of our homeowners association and to review certain rules that have been implemented in the past year." For the next hour, neighbors stood up one by one to share their experiences with Debra's reign of terror. Elderly residents who'd been fined for having medical equipment visible from the street. A family threatened with eviction because their child with Down syndrome liked to draw with chalk on their own driveway. A widow given citations because she couldn't keep up with yard work after her husband's death. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it professional despite my simmering anger. What happened to my son yesterday was not just a criminal act. It was the culmination of months of harassment and discrimination. My family moved here because we thought it would be a safe place for Jamie to grow up. Instead, he was targeted because of his disability. This isn't just about Debra Stevens. It's about a system that gave her the power to terrorize an entire neighborhood. By the end of the meeting, several resolutions had been passed unanimously. Debra was removed from the board effective immediately. The Appearance Standards section of the covenant was suspended pending review. A committee was formed to review all rules for potential discriminatory impact, and most importantly, a formal apology was issued to our family, along with a commitment to make things right. As we were leaving, Bob approached us. "I should have done more sooner," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "This should never have happened." "No, it shouldn't have," I agreed. "But what matters now is making sure it never happens again. To anyone." The next few weeks were challenging. Jamie refused to leave the house, afraid of running into the scissor lady. He wouldn't let us touch his hair to even it out, so he wore a beanie constantly, even to sleep. He had nightmares almost every night. We started him with a trauma-informed therapist who specialized in working with autistic children. Progress was slow but steady. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Debra moved forward. The district attorney called me into his office about 3 weeks after the incident. "She wants to make a deal," he said without preamble. "What kind of deal?" I asked. "Guilty plea to misdemeanor assault, 1-year probation, community service, anger management classes, and a public apology." I shook my head. "Not good enough. She assaulted a disabled child. That's a felony." "I understand your frustration, but her lawyer is arguing that she believed she was enforcing contractual obligations. Juries can be unpredictable with HOA disputes. She snuck up behind my son and cut his hair against his will, causing significant trauma. We have it on video. We have medical documentation of the psychological harm, and we have a history of her targeting him specifically because of his disability." The DA leaned back in his chair. "What do you want, Michael?" "I want the felony charge. I want her to understand the severity of what she did. I'm not interested in seeing her do jail time, but I want this on her record." He nodded slowly. "Let me see what I can do." 2 days later, he called back. Felony assault with a suspended sentence, 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service with organizations serving disabled children, mandatory education on disability rights, and a restraining order keeping her from coming within 500 feet of your family. Plus the public apology. She takes the felony, I confirmed. Yes, her lawyer made her understand that a jury would likely convict on the felony count given the evidence. I discussed it with Sarah and we agreed to the terms. It's not about punishment, Sarah said. It's about making sure she understands what she did and making sure she can't do it to another family. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, disability advocates who had heard about the case, and local media. Jamie wasn't there. We decided it would be too traumatic for him, but Sarah and I sat in the front row. Debra entered with her lawyer, looking much less confident than she had that day at the park. When the judge called on her to make her statement, she stood shakily. I want to apologize to Jamie and his family, she began, her voice surprisingly small. What I did was wrong. I was so focused on rules and standards that I forgot about basic human decency. There's no excuse for what I did, and I will spend a long time trying to make it right. The judge looked at her sternly. Ms. Stevens, what you did wasn't just a violation of law. It was a violation of the trust your community placed in you, and a violation of a child's bodily autonomy. The court accepts your guilty plea and the agreed-upon sentence, but I want to make something very clear. Your actions show a profound misunderstanding of both legal authority and human compassion. After the hearing, we stepped out to find a group of reporters waiting. I hadn't planned to make a statement, but seeing all those cameras, I realized this was an opportunity to help other families who might be facing similar situations. Today isn't about victory for our family, I said. It's about awareness. Homeowners associations serve an important function in maintaining communities, but they can't be allowed to discriminate against residents with disabilities or any other protected characteristic. What happened to our son shouldn't happen to anyone. And if you're a parent of a child with a disability facing similar discrimination, know that the law is on your side. As we drove home, Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. You know what this means, right? What? You're going to be getting calls from every special needs family having HOA troubles within a 100-mile radius. I laughed for what felt like the first time in weeks. I can think of worse ways to use my position. When we got home, Jamie was waiting with his grandmother. He'd made progress in therapy and had recently allowed a hairstylist who specialized in working with sensory-sensitive kids to even out his hair. It was shorter than before, but he was slowly adjusting. Did the mean lady say sorry? He asked when we walked in. She did, buddy, I told him, sitting down beside him but not touching him, since I knew he was still having a hard time with physical contact. And she promised never to bother you or any other kids again. He thought about that for a moment. Good. Can we plant the sunflowers now? That was Jamie, suddenly changing subjects to whatever had captured his attention. The therapist had suggested gardening as a calming activity for him, and he'd become obsessed with the idea of growing sunflowers along our fence. Absolutely, Sarah said. Dad bought the seeds yesterday. As we headed out to the backyard, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Bob and several other neighbors standing there with gardening tools and plants. We heard Jamie wanted to start a garden, Bob said. We thought we might help. Over the next few hours, our backyard transformed. Neighbors came and went, bringing plants, helping to dig beds, setting up a small sensory garden with different textures and scents that Jamie could explore. Someone even brought a wind chime, the very thing Debra had cited us for months ago. Jamie stayed on the porch at first, wary of so many people, but gradually moved closer as his curiosity overcame his anxiety. By late afternoon, he was directing operations, telling everyone exactly where each sunflower seed needed to be planted. As the sun began to set, our last few neighbors packed up their tools. Bob lingered, watching Jamie carefully water each newly planted seed. "The board met again yesterday," he said quietly. "We've completely revised the covenant. No more appearance standards beyond basic maintenance requirements. No restrictions that could impact residents with disabilities. And we've set up a process for requesting accommodations that doesn't involve getting permission from a single person." "That's good to hear," I said. "We're also thinking of starting a community support program, helping seniors and disabled residents with maintenance so they don't have to worry about citations. Some of the neighbors have specialized skills that could be useful. Contractors, handymen, gardeners. We thought maybe you and Sarah might help coordinate." "Given your experience," I looked at him, surprised. "That's actually a great idea. Sometimes it takes a crisis to bring a community together," he said, watching as Sarah helped Jamie rinse his muddy hands with the garden hose, both of them laughing as water sprayed everywhere. "We can't undo what happened to Jamie, but we can make sure something good comes from it. It's been 6 months since that day at the park. Jamie's hair has grown back, though he now prefers to keep it in a short ponytail rather than letting it hang loose. He still gets anxious in public places, especially around strangers with scissors, but he's making progress." Debra moved away shortly after her sentencing, unable to face the neighbors she had terrorized for so long. The last I heard, she was complying with her probation terms and volunteering at a center for children with autism as part of her community service. Our HOA has transformed. The community support program Bob suggested has taken off, with neighbors helping each other with everything from lawn care to minor home repairs. The revised covenant is now being used as a model by other HOAs in the region, looking to ensure their rules don't discriminate against residents with disabilities. As for our family, we stayed. Despite everything that happened, this has become home. Jamie's sunflowers grew taller than he is, a bright yellow wall along our fence that makes him smile every morning. The sensory garden has become a favorite spot for several neighborhood kids with various sensory processing issues. Last week, we hosted the first meeting of a new support group for families of children with autism in our community. Sitting in our backyard, watching Jamie proudly show another autistic child his garden, I realized something important. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to unexpected positive change. What happened to Jamie was inexcusable. The trauma he experienced will take years to fully heal. But in response to that cruelty, our community found its compassion. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak up found their voices. Parents of children with other disabilities found allies. And Jamie found that even after something scary happens, life can still be good. As a police chief, I've seen how power can corrupt and how rules can be weaponized against the vulnerable. As a father, I've learned that standing up for your child sometimes means standing up for your entire community. And as a neighbor, I've discovered that the true measure of a neighborhood isn't its property values or the uniformity of its mailboxes. It's how it treats its most vulnerable members. Jamie's hair will keep growing. So will he. And so will our community's understanding of what it truly means to be good neighbors. Subscribe if you've ever stood up to an unfair rule to protect someone you love.